Thanks for stopping by for our chapter spotlight this week. This week we're in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, and we find Solomon considering all the oppressions under the sun. And in verse 1, he is observing some people that are being oppressed, and he sees their tears. He sees that the people that are oppressing them have a lot of power over them, and that there's no one there to comfort them. And in verse 2, it goes on to say, these people would probably be better off if they were dead. And then in verse 3, he even goes as far to say, really, they'd probably be better off if they had never even been born yet. He said because if they had never been born, they would not have to experience the evil in this world. And it really is kind of depressing, and we're going to hear a few more things from Solomon that can get a little depressing if we let it. But hey, we know that there are bad things that happen in this world, and he's really just observing different people in different situations. So he goes on to observe a few other people, different types of people. And in verse 4, he describes kind of a workaholic. So he says, this person just wants more and more and more, and they want more than their neighbor, and their neighbor is envious of them. And he says, this is vanity. And vanity here means worthless, that there's no value in it. He says, really, it's vanity and vexation of spirit. And vexation of spirit here means that it's pointless or it's useless. And we'll hear those phrases a lot throughout this chapter and really throughout the whole book. In verse 5, we see Solomon describing a lazy person that he's observed. Lazy because he won't work. And then in verse 6, we see Solomon describing someone who's a little more balanced. This person's productive in work, and they also take some time to rest. And then in verse 7, again, we hear, then I returned and I saw vanity under the sun. So we hear that word vanity again. So let's see in verse 8 what he's observing. He's observing someone who's alone. He describes this person as someone who works and works, but he's not satisfied with what he has, and he has no one with him. He's totally alone. He has no one to leave anything to. He has no son. He has no friends. The verse describes this man as just totally being alone. And so, again, Solomon says this is vanity. In verse 9 through 12, we see two people that Solomon describes that are working together. And in verse 9, he says, two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. And if one falls, the other one can pick them up. If they're cold, they can keep each other warm. If they're attacked, they can better defend themselves, with there being two of them there. And verse 12 ends with a phrase about a threefold cord is not quickly broken. And I love the way Warren Wiersbe describes this. He says, if two travelers are better than one, then three would be even better. And he says Solomon really was thinking more than just numbers here. He was also thinking of the unity involved in three cords working together. And it's really a beautiful picture of friendship, and I agree with Warren Wiersbe there. We have 4 verses left in this chapter. And I had to go back to Warren Wiersbe's commentary to really get a good picture about what these last 4 verses were talking about, what was happening in these verses. So we start out reading that better is a poor and a wise child than an old and foolish king. And so Wiersbe says, consider this story. He says, the young man was born poor, but he became rich. The old king was rich, but it didn't make him any wiser. So he might just as well have been poor. He says the young man was in prison, but he got out and took the throne, and the old king was in prison by his stupidity. And he lost his throne. So far, the moral of the story is wealth and position are no guarantee of success, and poverty and seemingly failure are no barriers to achievement. The key here is wisdom. But the story goes on. And apparently the young man got out of prison, and took the throne because there was some kind of popular demand going on here where the people wanted this young man that had been in prison to take the throne. So he was popular king, everybody was loving him, and then all of a sudden the younger generations grew up around him and decided they didn't like him, so they rejected him, and the crowd appointed a new king and got rid of this one. So he ends the chapter with, surely this also is vanity and vexation of spirit. And in this chapter, as Solomon looked around, he understood that life was complex and difficult. And don't we all? I mean, we know that about life. It is difficult at times. It is complex. We can look around us at any given time and see people that are in difficult situations that we might very well find ourselves in a difficult situation. People need encouraging. So I'll go back to those verses where Solomon talked about that two are better than one because they can lift each other up when one falls. I say, yes, we know bad things happen in this world. We know people are in bad situations. We know people are oppressed. So be that friend. Reach out to other people and be there for them. And we can show God's love in those situations when we find people in difficult situations, and we can reach out and be that friend for them, give them some encouragement. Thank you for taking time to listen to our chapter spotlight this week, and I hope you'll join us next week when we'll be in Ecclesiastes 11. Thanks, and have a great